Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome. Welcome to Capital Connection Live. We welcome those of you who are here at our Family Life Center in Bath, and we welcome those of you who are watching at home tonight on our live web stream. We didn't realize when we had planned this event many, many months ago that we'd be up against that other really big event tonight. The one that's going to be a hard-fought battle. There's going to be a lot of back and forth struggling. It's probably going to get ugly at times, but hey, when it's over, I still think the New York Giants are going to beat the Philadelphia Eagles. So, maybe we need to get some of the NFL referees to moderate and officiate the debate tonight between President Donald Trump and his Democratic challenger, former Vice President Joe Biden. But I could picture them throwing flags and calling personal fouls and unnecessary roughness. So I don't think that'll go over too well. Hey, we welcome you. We hope tonight is going to be insightful and informative. We are blessed to have our guests here, Jason McGuire and Michael Geer. In just a minute, I'm going to introduce our MC for tonight. But before we do that, would you just join me in a moment of prayer? Father God, we come before you and we thank you for this opportunity, Lord. We thank you for the blessing and the privilege that we live in a country where we have the freedom to have differences over politics and where we are free to express our views. Father God, we lift up Jason and we lift up Michael and their organizations and the work that they are doing. And we pray that you would continue to bless and provide for them. Father, in a divided, divisive climate that we are in, we praise you for the comfort and the reassurance that we have that you are bigger than everything that is happening in our country. And Father, thank you for that. No matter what happens on election day, no matter what happens the day after the election, you will still be sovereign and on your throne. Father, you are unchanging. And we thank you for your grace, for your mercy, for your love. And we ask that you bless this event. Father, we ask that you be glorified through the work that we do. We ask for your blessing to be with those who are attending here in person and those who are watching remotely online tonight. And everyone said, amen. All right. Our MC for tonight is a guy who's been a part of the Family Life News team for a couple of decades. I think he started when he was about 8 years old. It was actually his idea 2 years ago when we did this for the first time. It was his idea to bring Jason and Michael here for an in-depth discussion of the issues in the campaign. And so would you please give a nice warm welcome to Family Life's Bob Price.
Well, hello. How are you guys? In-house and online, thank you for being here. It's great to be with fellow political junkies. This is awesome. And as Dave mentioned, we have a lot to be in prayer about for this election. I've known Jason and Michael for about a decade. And what I love about these guys, and you're going to hear their heart tonight, is they're not just interested in legislation. They're interested in legislators and winning people to Christ. And they have such a unique perspective to politics. You know, sometimes we don't like to talk about politics. It's an ugly word, but it's crucial. And it's important that we have this discussion. And I think you're going to leave here informed. One thing you're not going to hear, we're not going to endorse any candidates tonight, but you're going to leave here informed. And I think you're going to leave here just encouraged going forward. So without further ado, before we get started in introducing our guests, we want to hear from you. One of the most important things about tonight, in-house and online, is Jason and Michael have driven several hours to be here. They want to hear what your questions are. So if you have questions about whether it's a local race, state races, the national election, whatever, we want you to text your question to 888-413-4156. And that should be up on the screen throughout the program, and let us know what your questions are. In the second half of the program, we're going to bring these questions to Jason and Michael. And so if you would do that, start thinking about your questions now, and then we'll bring that in the second half of the program. So let's introduce tonight's guest. Jason McGuire is Executive Director of New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms and the President of New Yorkers Family Research Foundation. He lobbies lawmakers on pro-life, pro-family, and religious freedom issues. The Reverend McGuire, as we like to call him, the very Reverend, attended Practical Bible Training School in Binghamton, now Davis College, and holds a Bachelor of Theology degree from Andersonville Theological Seminary in Georgia. Prior to his work with New Yorkers, Jason served as the senior pastor of the Ingleside Christian Church in Naples, New York. And Jason is a dear friend of mine. We both love the Buffalo Bills, even when they lose. Jason and his wife, Lauren, have 4 beautiful children, and they live in the Rochester region. Jason's going to come and share briefly about his work at New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms. Make him feel welcome, the Reverend Jason McGuire. And also joining us tonight, a man who drove several hours to be with us and did not get stopped at the border. Thankfully, the troopers let him through. Michael Geer, President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Family Institute. The Pennsylvania Family Institute is a not-for-profit that promotes the sanctity of life, religious freedom, and building strong marriages and families. Michael serves as well on the board at Citizen Link, which is a public policy partner with focus on the family, as well as the Reach Alliance, which promotes school choice all across the country. Before starting at the Pennsylvania Family Institute, Michael worked, as I do, in news, and I worked for 8 years at WPXI in Pittsburgh, and I did not know this, 2 years at World News Tonight with Peter Jennings on ABC. Michael and his wife, Susan, who is with us tonight as well. Hello, Susan. I can't see in the lights. Parents of 5 children and the grandparents of 2 beautiful boys. Mike, it's an honor to call you a friend.
Thank you.
And your insights and analysis every Friday on Capital Connection, can't say enough about. Professional all the way. Please make him feel welcome, Michael Geer. So next on the program, Michael and Jason are both going to share for about 10 minutes a little bit about their ministries, and we'll begin with you, Jason.
There are over 90 million Christians in the United States today. When we unite and turn our faith into action, we have tremendous influence. What could our communities look like if we as believers stood for Judeo-Christian values at the ballot box? We aren't doing this alone. We are joined by millions of Christians across the country who are committed to standing for biblical principles. When we think about the issues important to our faith, biblically line them up against the candidates, pray for God's wisdom, and then turn our faith into action and cast our vote, then we lead our communities to real solutions that are right and true. But we must show up and take a stand. Our communities need us. Our nation needs us. And together, we can be the difference.
Well, good evening. Again, my name is Jason McGuire. I serve as the Executive Director of New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms, where we say we exist to influence legislation and legislators for the Lord Jesus Christ. We want to make an impact on the laws of the land because it's a powerful shaper of what future generations will believe is morally correct. But we also want to be an influence in the hearts of our legislators or elected officials because the law isn't what saves us. It's a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And whether you're the president or governor, state senator, or member of assembly, we want to make sure that you know the gospel just as everyone else does. They need to have an opportunity to come to know Christ as their Lord and Savior. It is my joy to be with you tonight. First, I'd be remiss if I did not thank Bob and the folks here at Family Life Network for putting this on tonight and bringing this together. They're wonderful ministry partners with us, and we just love working with this whole family here, really, and helping to educate people across the state about what's going on in the Empire State and what we as believers can do about it. You know, every Friday at 1 o'clock, I get my hair cut, and people kind of laugh at that. Every Friday? Yeah, every Friday. And I get my hair cut more often than my wife or anybody else I know. But every Friday at 1 o'clock, I get my hair cut. And one of the reasons I do that is because I get to sit in the chair and I get to hear what is going on in the community and what people are talking about. And there's two things that you really shouldn't talk about and mix today, and so we're told. It's religion and politics, right? And yet that's all I talk about in that chair, and seemingly all I do in what I do in my life, because we get to talk about religion, and I use that term very broadly. I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, but also politics, because I view politics as just one of the spheres of influence that we are supposed to be influencing with the gospel, with the values that we stand for. And so I'm very interested in what's going to happen in this particular election. I look forward to talking about it tonight because there's a lot on the line. Well, in the Empire State, we're probably not a state that is in play at the presidential level. Nobody's running to our state to pick up electoral votes. They're not buying ads in our state, and campaigns aren't even sending yard signs here. People are purchasing them and putting them up. Because at the presidential level, we're not a state that is being competed over. But how the presidential ticket goes will have a direct impact on what happens in the lower ballot races in our state. It will matter with Congress. It will matter with the state assembly. It will matter with the state senate, and so on. In fact, our state legislature is really one-party rule already. We have a Democratic governor and Governor Andrew Cuomo. We have a Democrat-led state senate, a Democrat-led state assembly. And so it's a one-party rule. But what most people don't understand is that if that one party picks up 2 more seats in this election, the legislature can act independent of the governor. They will have the votes they need to even override a gubernatorial veto. And so it really matters. In 2020, there probably aren't going to be great gains made at the state legislative level. This year, because the way the ticket is shaped and the way it's unfolding, a matter of holding our own, if you will, and the principles that we stand for is what we seek in 2020. But I'm optimistic and more optimistic about 2022, because as we build from 2020 into 2022, I think there's a path forward for our state. One of the things that I tell people when I travel is that I believe that one day New York will be a pro-life state. I believe that New York will be a pro-life state. Now, I'm not so foolish to say that it won't happen in a moment or two. It will take years, maybe even decades, hopefully in my lifetime. But there was a time in which people looked at certain platform positions and their parties stood on those platforms. And yet today, those parties would never stand on those same platform positions. Think of the issue of slavery. That is a position that no party would dare run on today, but they once did. And someday, they will see an attack on the sanctity of human life as so abhorrent that no party will support it. That's the vision that we are working towards. And I thank you for joining us tonight for this opportunity to be a part of this program.
Thank you, Jason. And again, if you have questions for Jason and Michael in the second half of the program, we're going to take those questions, whether you're listening online, watching online, or in-house this evening. Text those questions to 888-413-4156. Next up, Mr. Michael Geer, and I imagine you're going to say Pennsylvania is in play in 2020.
Yes, it is. And first, I just want to thank you, Bob, and Family Life for hosting this event again this year, but also for the opportunity to be on Capital Connections each week. I hear from people around the state that get the program and appreciate it very much. And you always ask very probing questions that really get to the heart of many of the issues that we deal with. So thank you very much. My name is Michael Geer. I'm the president of the Pennsylvania Family Institute, and as the slide says, Pennsylvania Family Council, kind of 2 hats that we wear. We have a nonprofit 501c3 organization, the Pennsylvania Family Institute, which does a limited amount of lobbying, but mostly educational work on the issues of the sanctity of life, marriage, family, and religious liberty. Pennsylvania Family Council would delve much more into the political realm. And since tonight we're talking about elections and so forth, even though we will not be endorsing candidates, I'm sort of wearing the Pennsylvania Family Council hat. Makes the attorneys at my office happy when I make that distinction there as well. Our vision as an organization is a Pennsylvania where God is honored, religious freedom flourishes, families thrive, and life is cherished. The Bible lays out very clearly God's plan for human flourishing and family flourishing, and the family is at the center of that. And certainly at the center of the family is marriage, but also the sanctity of life. And at Pennsylvania Family Institute and Pennsylvania Family Council, we engage on those issues. We have a number of different organizations. Slide, I mentioned the hats I wear. Pennsylvania Family Institute is the educational arm. We started a nonprofit pro bono law center called the Independence Law Center, which does litigation on these issues of sanctity of life, marriage, and family in the courts, including cases that have gone all the way to victories at the United States Supreme Court in the Conestoga Wood Specialties case that was tied with a Hobby Lobby case on the Obamacare abortifacient contraceptive drug mandate. We have a scholarship program called the Family Choice Scholarship Program in Pennsylvania, a groundbreaking school choice law that allows businesses to get a tax credit for making contributions to scholarship organizations such as ours. The businesses get what amounts to largely almost a dollar-for-dollar tax credit plus the tax deduction, and that money, instead of being sent to Harrisburg as taxes, where this might be a secret, but they burn it in barrels behind the Capitol. Maybe not. You might think they do. But instead of that, that money can be directed to help needy children attend Christian schools, private schools in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So we run that program as well. Then we have a political action committee called the Pennsylvania Family PAC that specifically will work with candidates who we believe uphold those biblical values as they pledge to run for office, or are candidates or incumbents, and back them as well on that. And so that's the kind of overview of our work. And one last outreach is something we call our Church Ambassador Network. And that is an effort much the same as Jason said. We're in the politics business and the legislative business, but ultimately we are in the gospel business. And politicians are not tools for us to use to advance some agenda, but they are human beings created in the image and likeness of God, who have families at home and face very serious challenges in their life. Being in that spotlight and facing the challenges that they do is a reason why 1 Timothy 2 tells us to pray for those in authority, because God knew the challenges that they face, and we see it every day in Harrisburg, and I know Jason does as well with the personal relationships that he has with lawmakers, and you hear about their lives. And so while politicians often get called names and criticized across the aisle by people from all walks of life, we as Christians need to be engaged in praying for them. And the Church Ambassador Network is specifically getting pastors in local communities to gather with the elected officials in their communities, specifically the state legislators, and simply pray for them. And we are seeing life-changing results as that goes. And lastly, we're going to be talking about voters' guides in a few minutes, but I just want to put a slide up about a theme that we're engaged in this election season. Next slide, which says Honoring God 2020. We have something called the Church Election Church Toolkit, pafamily.org/honoring God. And there's still 2 Sundays between now and Election Day. And we would encourage pastors to look at that church election toolkit created by our Church Ambassador Network. And then as part of that Honoring God theme and part of that church election toolkit is this video that we have put together that can be shown in churches or used on social media as well. And that's available at that pafamily.org/honoring God. And we can show that video now.
God created the church for every moment of life. He calls each of us to a living witness as His hands and feet in our communities. The church honors God in those moments when we serve others, when we worship, when we work, and when we speak for those whose voices are not heard. In these moments, the church shines its light for our neighbors. And there is one more moment for that light to shine, when our voices need to be heard. And now, in this moment, we must choose carefully, prayerfully. For this election, will you honor God with your vote?
Thank you, Michael. And let's have our live edition of Capital. You will hear Capital Connection tomorrow as well on the Noon Report. But let's have our live edition of Capital Connection on stage with Jason McGuire of New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms and Michael Geer at the Pennsylvania Family Institute. A little less intimate than we were 2 years ago due to the COVID restrictions, but so much to get to. And some of these questions will be directed at each of you individually. Some of them I'd like both of you to answer. And my first question is the question that I get asked the most, and probably a lot of people who follow politics are wondering about. I'd like both of you to answer this. Will we know on election night the results of this election? And if we don't, what will that impasse look like in your opinion? Will it be a la Bush v. Gore, where we didn't know till mid-December? Or do you think it'll be sooner than that, given the absentee ballots, the mail-in votes, unprecedented number of voters? I saw a statistic today that a majority, this will be the first election where a majority of votes are cast before Election Day. Will we know the results on election night? Jason, let's begin with you.
Yeah, I think we can pretty much guarantee that you'll have the results on election night. You're just not going to know whether it's the elephant or the donkey, but I assure you the lamb is still on the throne, all right? That's the first result, because oftentimes people will ask us, how can you be involved in political work today and not get discouraged? And you have to remind people that your hope is not in this world. Your citizenship is in heaven. So we start from that perspective. But beyond that, then we look at the results and knowing where we're coming from, well, then it's probably going to be some time. I think you'll see some early results come in. Then you're probably going to see a closing of the race as we begin to see more and more of those ballots. But no candidate, in my estimation, is going to have a runaway in this election. It's probably going to be hotly contested and ultimately ending up, I think, in the Supreme Court.
Michael, let me ask you the same question about the results. There's been so much discussion in each of the debates about whether or not there'll be a peaceful transfer of power. I don't need to reiterate all of the political rancor and division in this country right now. And I think what a lot of people want more than anything else is clarity on November 4th. Will we know the results on Election Day?
Well, I'm not sure that we will. I don't think we'll know the results in Pennsylvania because the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has decreed that the voting can continue for 3 days after November 3rd. And that goes to the importance of voting, because in 2017, Pennsylvania Supreme Court, there were several seats open on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and the voters of Pennsylvania got to choose who would sit on that court. And as it turns out, the Supreme Court and the results of that election in 2017 were that the ultimate result was that there are 5 Democrats on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and 2 Republicans. That court was flipped from Republicans previously. Now, we say the courts are not supposed to be political, but in Pennsylvania they're elected, and we would hope they would not be political. But we have seen, in my humble opinion, observing lawsuits related to COVID shutdowns in Pennsylvania that Governor Wolf has done, et cetera, that court seems to do what the governor wants. Well, just recently, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, though the law that was passed to allow early mail voting in Pennsylvania was very clear that ballots needed to be counted by Election Day. The law was black and white. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania changed that and said they could do 3 more days. So I think we're guaranteed that it's going to, unless there's a major blowout win, that we're going to see at least straggling votes coming in from Pennsylvania over several days.
I want to talk to you both about early voting a little bit. As we come to tonight, there were 3 major stories in our country. There was the Hunter Biden email story. There was the Supreme Court nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett, the Judiciary Committee moving that out of committee. The full Senate will confirm her on Monday. There's also the story of the last and final presidential debate and how much those first 2 stories come up in this last story. So it's a major news day. And the events of this day may sway people one way or the other, but already 45 million Americans have already voted. That's 30% of the total vote count from 2016. Your thoughts on early voting? I know in New York, Jason, they start 10 days of early voting on Saturday. There's early voting as well, Pennsylvania. How has this changed how we do elections in this country? Thoughts, observations, concerns? Michael, let's begin with you on this.
Well, it's changed our work at Pennsylvania Family Council and our PAC in that we have to start letting voters know where the candidates stand on issues much earlier than we previously did. I mean, it was sort of the countdown to game day, basically. In Pennsylvania, with the exception of the absentee ballots in the past, the absentee ballots which you needed an excuse, a reason that you were going to be out of town to get one of those. The Pennsylvania General Assembly passed a law last year that allows for this mail-in ballots for anybody. You can ask for them for any reason or no reason and start voting weeks and weeks before election time. That brings up the question of, the things that have happened in past election seasons, and we're seeing it now, the October surprise. People start voting before the surprise, and what if it is of extreme gravity? What's in the news right now is of extreme gravity in many people's views. Others are brushing it off and saying it's disinformation from somewhere or whatever. Nevertheless, I think there are probably some people who may wish they could reach back into the mailbox and pull the ballot out, because that's a real challenge. And same with the Supreme Court nominations. We have people voting for United States senators in different states who may have a role to play in this Amy Coney Barrett nomination, and may they didn't show up at the hearing today or the vote today. I might have changed my vote as a result. So I'm not a fan of early voting.
Not a fan of early voting.
No.
That's what I sense. The cardboard cutouts were there, though. I don't know if you saw those. But Jason, you said to me years ago, you are all for early voting. Get there early and vote.
Yeah.
There used to be in this country, election day was a sacred day. It was something we all did. It sacrificed us a little bit. It was an inconvenience, but we knew that going in. Those days are long gone. A third of the country that voted in 2016 has already voted, and there's still 12 days to go before this election. We're going to have 10 days of early voting starting Saturday in New York. It would be really interesting to get your thoughts on this phenomenon and how it's changed how we do election day, but also how candidates campaign and anything else you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, so with early voting, you're right. Get there at 6 a.m., the polls open in New York, right? I think it's how it should be. There is something unifying about coming together on a single day. And, in New York, we've always had the opportunity where if you're going to be out of the county for the day or there's a permanent absentee ballot, you can request those things. But now, similar to what Michael has in Pennsylvania, you can request that ballot if you have a fear of catching some kind of disease or whatever, almost for virtually any reason, you can have that ballot. And perhaps we're in a little different season right now with where we're at with COVID, but I think this is going to be what happens in New York moving forward, as we are now moved into a different kind of season in how we vote. And it saddens me because I think we do lose something with moving to this multiple day affair rather than a single day. And it may sound a little hokey, but the church roast beef suppers, the dinners, the times we gather. Certainly in this pandemic moment, the one thing we've come to realize is the importance of community. And there was something that unifies a nation, even at a divisive time like an election, when we can all come together, cast our ballots, know the results, and the next day move on with whoever the victor is. But that is changing in the American landscape, and I'm very concerned for where we are as a culture. We've got to get back to some sense of unity, even when we don't have unanimity in our decisions.
And I think also just the confidence that people have in the electoral process is diminished when they wonder about votes the counting that continues past the days of election day. I think, as Jason said, the simplicity of that single day and then knowing the results is something that builds confidence in the system.
Yeah, and I've always, when it comes to this whole issue of early voting, why just limit it to 10 days? Why not vote for the whole year? Just to me, it's changed everything in our political system. Thank you both for weighing in on that. Michael, you talked earlier about the Supreme Court ruling on the counting of ballots in Pennsylvania for 3 days after the election. Mm-hmm. Now, state law in Pennsylvania says they can't start counting the ballots until Election Day, correct?
Right.
That was a 4-4 decision at the U.S. Supreme Court. Explain that a little more, the significance that ruling will have in a state that many people think could ultimately decide the presidential race.
Well, it's significant because not only the counting of the ballots going on for days afterwards, but also receipt of the ballots, including now questions as to whether they need to have a postmark That was clear in the law that they needed to be clearly postmarked, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court introduced basically a fog in that whole situation, said they can accept some that don't have postmarks, et cetera. So it raises the specter. Philadelphia has consistently been in the news over decades with voter fraud. We saw that in 2016. We saw it in 2012. We saw it with voter intimidation allegations and those sorts of things. And so in terms of just what, there are many people that fear that one candidate will win on election night only to see, a Florida situation exponentially increased. The hanging chads that we had with Bush v. Gore exponentially increased in Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia being sort of ground zero for that to happen.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the pandemic and the influence. I don't remember. I wasn't around in 1918 for the Spanish flu. Maybe you were, Jason, but I don't remember there ever being a presidential election in the middle of a pandemic. Just this week, we saw in this county, the Corning region move into the yellow phase of the COVID Cluster Action Initiative. I think I got that right. Parts of Chemung County are in the orange phase. So if you want to get your haircut, you have until midnight. And then the barbershops shut down in Elmira, New York. I asked a congressman today, Tom Reed, how this might impact the vote. Could the governor decide to shut down the polling places in the name of a health emergency or something like that? To play out that scenario, if you would, about voting during a pandemic, how voting is done, how campaigns are run, and how elections are conducted.
That is the challenge, because you can't have events, right? I mean, you're doing socially distant everything. It's challenging. In New York, we have this Congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and how is she campaigning today? Well, she's on the social media platform playing video games to reach younger voters today. So it's really changed how campaigns are conducted. But even today, as of today, the governor's counsel, Beth Garvey, came out with a statement and said that even in a red zone, voting will be permitted on election day. And so I think that no matter what, we're going to have the election. The question is who's going to show up. And so as these zones move through their various things, many people have chosen to vote early. And what may happen is it may discourage the vote as these zones move deeper and deeper shades of red, right? Until we get there. So I am concerned about that. And that's the problem, because now we're also raising concerns about an election that we want to have confidence in the process, but our voters getting disenfranchised because now we have this pandemic in which we need people to go vote, but the argument would be they may not because of the coronavirus and other concerns. So it really does impact, where we're at as a people.
You mentioned haircuts, and I think he's stored up enough haircuts to last him a year.
Sorry,
I got burned in COVID-19. I'm going every week now. That's right.
But Jason, you said something to me when it comes, this is a little side rabbit trail here, but you said something to me when it comes to church attendance where you are. Yeah. You're not in any colored zone, right, but your church can't have as many people attend services as are attending in the yellow. Explain that.
Yeah, well, first, let me just tell people that the Flowbee is not as good as advertised, all right? Just remember that, all right? I'm not going back there again. Where are we with churches? Here's the inconsistency of Andrew Cuomo. Under the Cuomo administration, if you are in a yellow cluster action initiative zone, churches are allowed 50% of building capacity. But I'm in the Rochester region. I'm not in a cluster action initiative. I'm not in a yellow zone. And our churches are only allowed 33% of building capacity. If it's safe for a church in a cluster zone to gather at 50%, how is it less safe for churches in my area to be at 33%? And so what concerns me with how we're approaching this is politics does seem to be driving so much of the process rather than the policy. If this really was a serious concern, then it would be treated differently with churches, but it's not. And that's a problem that I think we need to be looking at.
Your thoughts, Michael, on the pandemic and how it is influencing, I don't know if Governor Wolf, seems a lot of stuff that Governor Cuomo decides, your governor say, hey, that's not a bad idea. And
yeah. Well, I think even early in the pandemic, there was some kind of agreement with the New Jersey, Pennsylvania, the Northeastern governors to kind of get together and plan things out. And as time has gone by, as Jason just brought up, it seems more politically driven in many cases than policy driven or even driven by the science, even though they continually quote that. It's unclear yet the impact that the pandemic will have in Pennsylvania in terms of voting specifically. Obviously, the push for mail-in voting is much more significant, and we see volunteers from political parties standing. For example, I saw a story of a volunteer standing outside the courthouse in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, telling people they could register to vote right then and then hand them their ballot to fill out and turn in, which raises questions of kind of personal influence on voting. I mean, when you go into the voting booth ordinarily, you're by yourself and you're in there, and when you have people filling out the ballots and those things, raises questions. But I have the same concern we see the numbers rising, or at least the reported numbers rising, that the sort of curtain may come down and basically trying to scare people from going on election day.
Let me ask you both this question. The president has said repeatedly there's evidence of voter fraud with the way it's done now. There have been cases in Pennsylvania where some Trump ballots got discarded. Now, according to election officials in that county, it was done purely by accident, not politically motivated. There were cases in Ohio where 50,000 ballots were mailed out erroneously. We see these across the country. Any concern on either of your parts that there's a systematic problem, given the way that so many people are voting nowadays, that would lead anyone in this audience or listening online to believe that there's a problem with our election system? Jason, you want to tackle that first?
I think that anytime there is opportunity for power and authority to be had, there are people who be tempted to cheat the system to attain that. So I think there are people that will try to do that. There are probably some very unintentional things that happen too. We had a vendor in Rochester that was printing ballots and sent like 100,000 wrong ballots downstate. Created some problems, right? I mean, now you're gonna have double ballots sent in different situations. That's problematic. It is difficult at a presidential level, I think, of an election that large to have that much fraud to sway the entire national election. But you don't have to sway the entire national election. You can sway single states that are very closely divided right now. And so if people are paying attention to some of these swing states, and they can do ballot harvesting where they go out and buy the ballots that people are requesting and fill them out a certain way, or oops, we lost some ballots that we believe are going for one candidate over another, that's really problematic. And I think that's what we have to watch. And even down ballot, if it's difficult to change at the national level, it gets easier the lower down the ballot you go. I've been in the room when boards of elections are looking at the ballots and lawyers determine which vote counts and which doesn't. And there are very small things that can discount a ballot from the process. So I think we should be concerned about that, but let's not live fear in it. Let's just go out there and do what we got to do. And ultimately, I'm responsible for my vote, and then I'm going to move forward and trust God with those results.
I know in Pennsylvania they have the signature debate. Does the signature on the registration form match the signature on the absentee ballot? I don't know if there's any update to that case. That's huge. It's very significant.
That is big because when you vote in person, they compare that signature.
They compare the signature.
But then the Supreme Court said, Pennsylvania Supreme Court said that signatures, that requirement, or the Secretary of State saying that requirement does not need to be followed.
Okay, and that was upheld.
Well, I'm not quite sure about the ultimate resolution on that. There's so many cases pending in Pennsylvania related to the election process that I'm not positive about the
so
outcome
just
of
as
that one.
just in general speaking terms, I know I've never seen a president and vice president. Vice President Pence will be in Pennsylvania again tomorrow. The president has been there no fewer than 7 times since September. A lot of folks are saying those 20 electoral votes are the key. Any reason to believe, those listening online or in the audience from your state tonight, Michael, that they don't have reason to trust the system as it is based on all the mail-in ballots that we're seeing this year?
Well, I would put it in the same camp that Jason just did, which is we need to do our duty and get out there and vote, whether it's whether you decide to fill out a mail-in ballot and send it in or drop it off at the courthouse or wherever the receptacle is appropriate, or show up on election day. We need to do our part. Ultimately, we can't know for sure how it's going to play out. We need to have that level of trust that our vote is going to make a difference. There are many people who have in the past thought my vote doesn't make a difference. We've proven over time that it absolutely does, and we have hope and certainly pray that it will this time around as well.
Again, we got about 10 more minutes in this segment, guys. I want to get down to the nitty-gritty and some of the races. We're going to be talking about this tomorrow. There's a shameless plug on Capital Connection, some of the races that you need to be watching about. But before I say that, again, let me reiterate. If you have a question for Michael or Jason, 888-413-4156. The second half of the program, Mr. Brandon Dixon here on my left is going to take those questions, and we want to hear from you. That's mostly why they came up tonight, is to hear from you about your concerns about this election. So what's at stake, guys? Of course, the race for president. We have all 435 House seats, 35 Senate seats, none in New York or Pennsylvania, 11 governor's races this year, and of course, control of the state legislature. You said something earlier, Jason, I thought was interesting, that talking about the New York Senate is just 2 votes from having supermajority status. Explain again what that is and why those watching tonight need to be concerned.
Yeah, well, essentially for 2 reasons. The legislature leans so heavily towards the Democratic side, and honestly, it's not just about a party; it's about the principles behind it. That it is moving further and further left. And so the issues that I care about, and I care about things like protecting human life and promoting strong families and preserving religious liberty and proclaiming the biblical concepts of justice and mercy, not a social justice agenda, but the biblical concepts of justice and mercy. Those are the values that we care about. And if the legislature should shift 2 more seats, it can essentially do whatever it wants. So even the governor, if the governor, and believe it or not, I hope you're sitting down here and at home, the governor is the moderating force in Albany these days. And we know that we have a very liberal governor in New York State, but he is the moderating force in Albany. So if the governor is the moderating force, you can imagine how far left the legislature is. We have legislators that are running and have won their primaries in heavily Democratic districts. They will be coming in January. They don't even have a Republican challenger in some of these seats, so I know who's coming in, who are running on platforms of legalizing prostitution. That's where we are as a state. And if 2 more of those seats are picked up in the Senate, they can look at the governor and say, we no longer need you. The legislature can pass whatever it wants. The governor can veto it, and the legislature can come back and override a gubernatorial veto. So even a left governor, Andrew Cuomo, who is a moderating force, will have no authority to stop what the legislature wants to do with its far left as it's moving. Additionally, we are now entering into the redistricting phase. Every 10 years following the census, you're in the redistricting phase. And you know as well as I do that political lines are drawn to favor a political party, to make it easier for that party to win the seat than for the opposing party. Well, now we have a problem. Because essentially you have one party that will entirely control the process. Traditionally, the assembly has been democratically controlled, and so the Democrats there draw the lines to favor their candidates, and in the Senate, the Republicans have drawn lines to favor their candidates. Everybody knew it, don't like it, you want it fair, you want it nonpartisan, you get it, but it happens. Lo and behold, the assembly has well over 100 Democrat members to only 43 Republicans. And now even in the Senate, they have a Democratic advantage, and Republicans have lost the control there. Through redistricting, that may very well get worse if they pick up even 2 more seats. Republicans have no voice in the redistricting process. That's what's at stake in 2020.
And that's, guys, why that down ballot races matter. When you go to vote, sometimes you'll say New York. Doesn't matter who I vote. Those down ballot races matter. And Jace, thank you for explaining that, why it matters so much. Michael, our friends in Pennsylvania, a little more of a system of checks and balances there than there is in New York. They don't have one-party rule in Pennsylvania, but they're not far away. Democrats need 4 Senate seats and 9 House seats to take back control of the General Assembly. 4 Senate seats, 9 House seats. Do you see either of those scenarios happening this year in Pennsylvania?
Well, just today, what's called the Cook Political Report, which is kind of the go-to sort of place that does political prognostication across the country and looks very closely at races, both at state legislative races up to Congress and beyond, just moved the Pennsylvania General Assembly, the House and the Senate, into the toss-up phase as the potential for it to flip. Now, I remember sitting here on the stage with Jason back in 2018 when he was warning about the New York Senate, right? Yep. Potentially going into control of one party and creating the one party rule. And everybody remembers the result of that, which is the One World Center, the Freedom Tower in New York City being lit up with pink lights after Governor Cuomo signed that radical abortion law. We have used that picture in Pennsylvania to say this is what's at stake in our Commonwealth if the governor's party takes the House of Representatives and the Senate, which is why the down ballot races matter so much in Pennsylvania. The same thing happened in the Commonwealth of Virginia in 2019. A massive influx of outside the state money came in to push for Democrat Party control. I'll just talk about it specifically about what happened in Virginia. And in short order, Virginia, and they have a 6-week legislative session. In 6 weeks, that legislature with a very liberal governor took Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, left of California. So those who are watching in Pennsylvania and think, again, the presidential race, I don't know. Obviously, it matters in Pennsylvania because we're a swing state, but those down ballot races are important as well. So if you're filling out, I talked to a gentleman who filled out one of the paper ballots, one of the mail-in ones, and he didn't look on the next page to see the other races, and he only voted for president and sent it off. And when I was talking about the other races, he said, what are you talking about? There was only the president on the ballot. We need to pay attention and to vote intelligently and to vote every race and to find out what we can about the candidates.
Tomorrow we'll be talking a lot about the congressional races, but if you would, each of you take one or two that you think are the races to watch. I think I know which ones you're going to pick. But Michael, let's begin with you. One or two of the congressional races, all 435 House seats, control of Congress up for grabs. There's no U.S. Senate races in either state this year. But one or two of the races that you're watching on November 3rd.
Well, the most significant one and the tightest one in the Commonwealth on the congressional side is one that's being watched nationally and lots of national money coming in, lots of TV advertising, et cetera, is the PA-10, the Scott Perry of the incumbent Republican Scott Perry versus Eugene DePasquale, who's the Auditor General for Pennsylvania. That district was changed in 2018 by order of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, again, a result of the 2017 elections there, and it includes 2 cities. It had been a largely Republican district, but when Harrisburg and York both were put into that district, it made it tough for a Republican to hold on to. So that's the biggest one that's very close down to the wire, and that's the one that turnout is going to make the difference.
And that's your home district.
Yep.
All right.
It is. That's where I live.
Yep. And Jason, one or two races that you're watching. I know there's a big one right in this district, Tom Reed, Tracy Matrano in here, but maybe a couple others that you know of that are ones to watch on election night.
Yeah, well, I think I'm certainly watching the one, again, we're here with Representative Tom Reed and Tracy Matrano. I think that Representative Reed's going to do all right in that one. There's a lot of rural areas in there, so I feel pretty comfortable with that. But there's been a lot of attention put in that race. The one that I think is going to be perhaps the closest race in the nation, though, is that race between Representative John Katko and Dana Bolter, and that's a rematch race. And that's really going to come down to turnout as to what happens there. Now, up front, I'm just going to tell you, Representative Katko doesn't always take every position on the issue that I would like. I understand that. But I'm looking at this as a chess move, as a strategic action. And so when people are voting in races where they may not even always identify completely with one candidate or the other, it's important to realize that the first vote they cast in the House of Representatives when they come back is going to be for the Speaker of the House. And the Speaker determines the agenda for that House and for that session. So you've got to ask yourself, which Speaker do I prefer? Do I prefer the direction that Nancy Pelosi is taking the country, or would I rather see it with McCarthy or some other direction the Leader McCarthy would take that House? And so that's the question for me when I come into difficult districts, because in New York, you're not always going to find a candidate in either party that's going to line up with you 100%. So you got to find out what is the first vote they're going to cast and what people will they have around them. That's kind of what I look at when I cast those ballots.
Again, those who aren't familiar, the Katko-Bolter race is Syracuse Central, New York. race there. So the last couple minutes we have, guys, I know in your packets you may have received voter guides on what's on the ballot this year. I know both of you have printable forms of the voter guide, so you can go to your computer, download it, and print it that way. But for those online tonight watching, explain a little bit what's on your voter guide and how people can get that voter guide. If we would, Jason, begin with you.
So let me encourage you to visit NewYorkVoterGuide.com. At NewYorkVoterGuide.com, you'll have the opportunity to, well, one, there's a resource section. You can click on the resources. You can do similar to what's going on in Pennsylvania. You can find videos you can use at your church or various meetings. You can find a printable version of the voter guide, the presidential voter guide, in both English and Spanish, as well as videos in English and Spanish. You can also find social media memes and slides for your church and things to encourage people to vote and to visit NewYorkVoterGuide.com. Now, what we offer is a print presidential voter guide and a website that then NewYorkVoterGuide.com, where you can click on and receive your personalized ballot. And what we mean by that is you go there, you type in your name and your address into the little form on the page there, and then as you click on that, it will pull up your candidate specific to your home address, to your ballot. So you'll vote for president like everybody, right? You'll see vice president. But then you'll see your member of Congress. And you're not just going to see the names of the candidates on the ballots, but you're going to find out where they stand on the issues because we've done the research, or we have given them surveys to tell us where they stand on the issues. Then you'll do the same with state Senate and the same with state assembly. And then at the end of the process, you have the option of either texting those choices to your mobile device, or you can print out your ballot so you don't forget the names of who you want to vote for when you go to vote. And so it really is important that New Yorkers visit NewYorkVoterGuide.com and then share that information with others in their circle of influence so we can get people out voting for the values that I know you and I both care about.
Michael, what I love about yours is you have two forms. You have one that you can just go and get, and you also have a voter guide that's church friendly.
Right.
And if you would explain how your voter guides work.
Well, we have two, as you just mentioned. We have the online guide, which is very similar to what Jason just described. It creates the online personalized voters guide with the president all the way down to the Pennsylvania General Assembly and the members of Congress. PAFamilyVoter.com is the website where you can access that. And if you're from Pennsylvania, feel free to share that around, put it on Facebook or other places so people can access that. Many people have told me in the past that they're afraid to pull the lever on some of those lower down ballot races because they don't know where the candidates stand. So they go in all charged up to vote for the presidential candidate, and they think, I don't know where these other people stand, I'm just not going to do it. Now is the time to find out so you can do the right thing when you're in the voting booth. So we have that, and then we have the print guide there, which there's a cover of it. We brought some here. If anybody from Pennsylvania wants to take some with you here, those are legal for distribution in churches. We've had hundreds of churches around the Commonwealth get those to provide for those attending church and to pick up in person, and something we've been producing since the early 1990s for citizens in Pennsylvania.
Let me just clarify that our materials are also available for churches. I want to make sure everybody understands those can be handed out in churches, totally legally compliant. So whatever you can find at NewYorkVoterGuide.com, you can use at your church as well.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, it's been an informative first half. We're going to take a 5-minute break or so. Let these guys just chill for a little bit. Let you guys use the bathroom if you have to. And online, folks, we want you two to know that we know it's not easy to pick up, drive 3 hours. Jason, it's a little bit of a drive for you as well. So we'd like to take up a love offering for you tonight. It's not going to be a traditional love offering due to the COVID restrictions. But if you text GIVE, if you text SHARE, I'm sorry, I'm reading the note, I can't read. If you text SHARE to 91999, and those online, if you're hearing this as well, it might be on the screen now. Text SHARE to 91999. We'd just like to show you how much we appreciate both your ministries. I just want you to know personally, my most fulfilling 10 minutes of radio are the 10 minutes that I spend with you each week because I know the difference it's making. So thank you both. We're going to take a brief intermission and come back. Brandon Dixon is ready to go with your questions. Capital Connection Live. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Fire with New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms, those in-house and online. Michael, I think you win the longest travel to be here tonight award. I don't know what we have in the goodie bag, but anyone beat 3 hours?
No, but I had to drive New York roads. Doesn't that count for something?
So thank you both. And I'm pleased to, now we want to hear from you. And I'm pleased to introduce the news director, Brandon Dixon. And Brandon is going to take over this portion of the show with some probing questions for our guests. Go ahead, Brandon.
That's right. Thank you, Bob. We've got some good ones. I know that we talked to a few of the important races. So this one going to Jason, batting lead off, says in the New York 22nd congressional race, which candidates are pro-life?
Okay, so let's see. 22nd, you're talking, is that the, we're looking at Tenney and Brindisi, right?
That's
all right,
correct.
So New York 22, we've got both were former members of the Assembly. You have Representative Claudia Tenney running against, or former Representative Claudia Tenney running against the current Representative Anthony Brindisi. And that's an interesting race because it really is going to come down to turnout. If the president does well in that district, it would bode well for Claudia Tenney. And if the president doesn't do as well, it's probably going to be more difficult and probably a win for Mr. Brindisi. I can tell you this, the Claudia Tenney stands against Governor Cuomo's late-term Abortion Expansion Act. And so I think that's something that voters are very interested to know, that she does not support the radical abortion expansion agenda that's there. And from her days in the Assembly, I can tell you she's been an ally in the life issues. Not there with Mr. Brindisi. So I think that's pretty clear as to where the two stand on the issues. And voters back home will find those positions as well at NewYorkVoterGuide.com.
This one can be opened up to both of you guys. I think we were talking a little bit about this backstage, but someone wanted to know what your thoughts are on the John Piper article on why he probably will not be voting to, or seem to allude to not wanting to vote for Donald Trump this election.
Well, who wants to go first on that one?
Jason's the reverend here, so I think,
That's right. Yep. Did they cut my mic out already?
Clergy first.
You know, it's tough because, you know, I was a pastor. We still have a Bible study at the Capitol. But I realize that every time I vote, you know, I hate to hear the term of lesser of two evils. I never vote for the lesser of two evils. I vote for the people that more align with the policy positions that I appreciate. And every election I have to do that. You know, I also think about the fact that I vote for people that surround themselves with people who will listen to godly counsel. You know, I look at Exodus 41:46, and we read there about Joseph. Well, Joseph didn't work for the godliest of leaders, right? You know, when he was in Pharaoh's household and involved in the whole issue there of taking care of things through we'll say their pandemic, their famine, right? And yet he was a godly young man that God used in that position of influence on an ungodly leader. And, you know, and there are things that I wish candidates would do differently, but I watch who they're surrounding themselves with. And I know when I turn on the news today and I see people that Michael and I have both worked with in state organizations like ours, or at the, you know, currently the Department of Justice or Health and Human Services, and I see Christians that are serving in those places, it tells me that at the very least, there are people there that are supporting the positions that I appreciate. And whether you like it or not, people are policy, right? We talk about it negatively when people talk about deep state. Well, those are just long-term civil servants that have burrowed down into the system and they're doing everything they can to impede certain actions. Well, the same is true when there's people there that share our values. They burrow down and they'll be there for hopefully decades to come to advance the things that we care about. So, I know John Piper has an article out today, and I know we want to look for perfect candidates. They do not exist. You know, oftentimes people will say, well, you know, I'll vote when Jesus is on the ballot. Well, he's never going to be, right? You're never going to find that candidate on the ballot. Does character matter? Absolutely. But I am engaged in a game of chess, and we have to make strategic moves to advance the values that we care about. And I can't stand by and watch America go in a direction that my kids and my grandkids and generations are going to inherit, that they may lose issues like religious liberty. We've just got to take a stand in our day, and it's not a perfect choice, but it's my choice.
So I want to echo what what's your name again?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I want to echo what Jason said. I was thinking Brandon, but you're the one asking the questions. I want to echo that and to say a couple of things. One, I heard Gary Bauer back in 2016 when we were in the heat of that election and there were things about the different candidates that people didn't like. And he, having worked in Washington, D.C. with Family Research Council for so many years, and prior to that with the Reagan administration, told the audience that had gathered with us there that evening that the president appoints about 5,500 people to positions of authority in federal government. As Jason said, people is policy, personnel is policy. And he knows, and I know, people in significant positions in Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Education, that are making a difference on church and their ability to worship, or making a difference in what happens in privacy issues and LGBT issues and so many different things, that when pastors or others write these articles and talk about the personality of either a candidate and ignore the far-reaching impact of what either of those two candidates will mean for the future of the nation, I think they're doing a disservice. I will point to Pennsylvania Family Institute Council did a webinar last week with theologian Wayne Grudem, Dr. Wayne Grudem from Phoenix Seminary. He's written a number of dozens of books, including one, Politics According to the Bible. And then we had two pastors, an African-American from the Harrisburg area pastor and a pastor from Western Pennsylvania, who talked specifically about church engagement and voting. And people who want to access that, I really recommend watching it. It's available on our website at pafamily.org/webinars. And you can view that because it really addresses some of these issues, I think, from a biblical and theological perspective, which is important. There's sort of some folks that kind of delve into the political realm every 4 years, having watched some TV commercials and maybe just kind of glanced at what's going on without really knowing the depth that someone like Jason encounters to be able to say, no, here's what really happens in government and how your vote really makes a difference.
We've definitely heard a lot about Pennsylvania being a battleground state. We've seen it with all the visits from the presidential candidates, and it seems to become the battleground state right now. Someone wanted to know, what does it take to win Pennsylvania? What does a candidate need to do to get those electoral votes?
Well, the issues that are hot in Pennsylvania are, some of them are specific to Pennsylvania. I mean, the president, when he was in Erie, spoke and even showed a video related to the issue of fracking. And that is a prominent job creator in Pennsylvania and energy creator in terms of energy independence. So that is one that's being talked about. And as we've seen other candidates on the other side kind of back away from previous promises that they made related to that, or not permitting it. So talking about those issues make a difference. I think also Pennsylvania was rocked, Philadelphia was rocked with the violence that happened, that still is, I think, reverberating in the minds of many voters. They may not be talking about it necessarily, and a couple of months have passed by since some of that happened. So I think addressing some of those issues. The other thing, and this is something that I think has creeped into Pennsylvania politics in the last few years from what had been the case to some degree in New York for a long time, is candidates that are willing to talk about a pro-abortion position. I looked at many websites from different congressional candidates on the political parties, and increasingly you'll see candidates in Pennsylvania talk about candidates who support abortion actually being bold about it. 10 years ago, that would not have been the case in Pennsylvania. And I don't know whether that shows a cultural shift or just a requirement by a particular party that tells their candidates, you have to endorse this, get behind it. Because we remember, Governor Bob Casey was one of the pro-life leaders in the whole country. So as Jason said, I believe there's going to be a time when both parties are pro-life. There was, when the Abortion Control Act passed in Pennsylvania in 1989, that was a bipartisan effort. And we who believe in the sanctity of life need to engage in every way to bring that ethic back in both parties.
This one's for both of you guys. We're going to look into the future a little bit. If President Trump loses and the Republicans lose the Senate as well, can the party recover in time for the 2022 midterm elections or the 2024 presidential election?
Well, I think, should that happen, there often is a course correction during the midterms that occurs. And so I think the party can, correct itself should it need to by 2022. I think what's going to be interesting to watch is who becomes the face of the party should that happen. And, I'm not sure exactly where that lands. I have some thoughts that, down the road, whether it's a Trump win or a Trump loss, certainly by the next presidential election, that's already going to be underway. And there will be a fight. I mean, it's probably going to be a bit of a food fight to see who's going to go ahead and emerge as the face of the party. But I expect it's going to be a younger face. I expect it will probably be a female face. And I think probably the party is going to increasingly already looking to ethnic minorities. And so I think you do see that that's already starting to happen. And whether there was a Trump victory or Trump loss this year, that's a process that's well underway already. John James, for example, is a candidate. You're running another state, but I expect he's going to pull out. Michigan, I think he's going to do well there. And I think you see increasingly that in the not too distant future, it won't just be U.S. Senator Tim Scott, but there will be others that are standing up for conservative values that look different than I do, that come from different backgrounds than I might, but are standing for some of the same values that you and I share.
I think the other thing to think about is if the scenario that you just described plays out in the Pennsylvania General Assembly or whatever, is that we may see somewhat of a repeat of what happened in 2008 into 2010 with President Obama taking office, and then what many would describe as an overreach in many respects with Obamacare and other things that happened, created the Tea Party wave that happened in 2010. And whether or not that happens this time, no one knows for sure, but that cyclical thing that Jason just talked about could very well play out this time around.
Yeah, if I could just jump in there for a minute again, just you think about what's happening right now where the Democratic candidate Joe Biden hasn't yet come out with a position on court packing. He says he's not a fan of it, but he hasn't stated his position. He said we're going to know it before the election, but again, how many have already voted? And we're now looking at really 10 days left before it. It's not a lot of time to let that position be known. I can't imagine a scenario in which, should he win, the party will not push him in that direction. And that may very well cause just a whiplash as that pendulum swings. And it does in political cycles. And I think that court packing could be the issue that drives that even further.
Interestingly, just the term court packing now is being redefined.
Yes.
One of my staff members who posted something on social media, on Facebook and Twitter, he talked about some of these redefinition of words after Amy Coney Barrett said sexual preference, and then she was chastised by Senator Hirono. And then next thing you know, Merriam-Webster dictionary changed their online definition of it. And he said this is like 1984, and he said the book 1984 was not intended to be an instruction manual. That's right. And yet we're seeing this kind of redefinition, whether it's court packing, which court packing means it's term, really talked about back in the Roosevelt administration when he tried to, because he was thwarted, many of his progressive programs were thwarted by the Supreme Court. He wanted to put more members on the court so he could get his way, which is basically just abandoning our constitutional system. That's what's being talked about with these, what many of the Biden's party is pushing for.
Here's an interesting one. We've talked about how this election might not be decided on November 3rd. There was something that Bob had thrown out there earlier. Someone wanted to know, is there a way that the election could not be decided by Inauguration Day? And if so, what happens then?
Isn't that when Nancy Pelosi becomes president?
Even that has not been determined by the courts.
When does it go to the U.S. House? There was an election in 1876, was it? Someone correct my history.
Michael?
That went to the U.S. House of Representatives, correct?
Well, it's interesting because there is actually some court cases that indicate it wouldn't necessarily go, that wouldn't be the first stop if that should come. I don't think that's going to happen, though. And let's remember that even if you get to inauguration, you may not even have a Speaker Pelosi at that point, regardless of one who wins the election. And two, they may choose another speaker. I mean, I remember there was a time where Speaker Pelosi said that this would be the last time she ran as an assurance to go ahead and vote for me this time, and that'll be it. Not hearing too much about that this cycle, but who is it after that? But honestly, I don't think it's going to take till inauguration. I think you're going to see that a court of 9 is probably where it's headed. I think Amy Coney Barrett will be confirmed. I think she'll be a part of that process. I think it is heading to the Supreme Court, but I think all eyes will want to move this before the inauguration. There will be a sense of urgency and expediency that the court will weigh in before Inauguration Day.
I want to jump in with a question of Jason, if that's all right, which relates to back in 2016, Franklin Graham and his ministry went to all 50 states with prayer rallies. We had almost 10,000 people turn out in Harrisburg in advance of the election. This year in Washington, D.C., there was the prayer march on the National Mall with tens of thousands of people. Your thoughts related to the impact of people praying? Even my wife is heading down on a bus down to Washington this Sunday for a time of prayer related to the election.
You know, it was amazing because if you think about it, there were actually two major prayer events that occurred in Washington, D.C. the day of that Rose Garden ceremony. And regardless of how you're going to vote this election, I'm very concerned about the courts. And I have been a big supporter of Amy Coney Barrett being on that court for some time. And I'm glad that now it looks like that is happening. But here is the scene in Washington, D.C. as one prayer national movement happened and then concluded. And then another began. Within 10 minutes of the shofar being blown, the call to worship and the call to war, going back to times of ancient Israel, as they gathered in a time of spiritual war and a time of also worship, the shofar was blown. 10 minutes later, Amy Coney Barrett was announced as the nominee in the Rose Garden that day. Don't tell me that prayer doesn't make a difference. A year ago, she was to be a nominee for that court. To be honest and frank, things didn't go so well with the White House in that interview. She had some reasons she wasn't performing well that day and ultimately went to Justice Kavanaugh. But she's back a year later because in that intervening year, people stopped and people said, we believe this woman should be on there. We are dedicating ourselves to prayer that she will be appointed to the court. God determined the course of events there, no one else. But God has answered prayers, and now Amy Coney Barrett will soon likely be confirmed to that court. What's the role of prayer in the election? Well, I'm going to vote and do everything I can, right? But I also believe that God hears the prayers of his people. And I literally believe that this election is in the hands of the Christian community right now, because I know that God turns the heart of a king whithersoever he will. And if God can turn stubborn political kings and other elected and governmental officials, certainly he can turn the stubborn hearts of this nation as well. And so it really is in the hands of godly people to say, we're going to pray about this election. So cast your ballot, but fall to your knees and intercede for our nation at this time.
The listener wanted to know, what do you think are the objections that Democrats have against voter ID laws?
Well, since we were, Jason was bringing up my geriatric status, I was 3 years old when the Nixon-Kennedy race happened, and there was voter fraud in Chicago that ended up in Kennedy winning that race. So there would be some that suggest that voter ID and some of those things are good fraud protections, and there are others that would say that that it is an impediment to voting. There were those that think it's a good safety measure would say that no, it's not an impediment to voting. We show our IDs when we get on airplanes. We show our IDs for so many other kinds of things that those who oppose voter ID are doing so because they want to keep things a little bit fast and loose. Those are sort of the arguments that are made related to that.
Yeah. You know, we've been kind of at home for a while, and so I finally got up out of the basement yesterday and went to the mall, and got up and had to take care of some phone things. And so I get into the little booth area. They got this piece of plastic separating us and a little thing. I pass the information below, and they're training a new phone employee at the store. And so the more seasoned folk there, of all of 22 years old probably, looked at the other one he was training, the rookie, and said, you never allow someone to come in and access their cell phone changes or account or information or anything unless you first see their driver's license. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, I can't get my daughter's phone replaced, with a cracked screen without showing my driver's license, right? But I can walk in and I can cast a ballot to decide the future of our nation without voter ID. I am a proponent of voter ID. I absolutely think we should have it. And you know what? Here's the thing. People are getting cell phones somehow. And if you can't access that account without some kind of form of ID, then how in the world could they not have an ID when they go to vote? And I just think it is something that would secure our system. I think we ought to have it. You can get non-driver's licenses. You can get various forms of government IDs. In New York, you don't have to be a citizen right now. You can get a driver's license. So I would say that getting forms of government ID are pretty easy and pretty accessible and really aren't the impediment that, and I hear your point, because that's what a lot of people are saying, it's an impediment. It's got to cost us something to participate in this process. And if it means I got to get a form of government ID to protect the election process, then so be it. The debate in my state is whether or not you can even, whether or not the return ballot should be free or you got to put a stamp on it, right? Man, it costs people something to bring us this nation. In fact, it cost a lot of lives and a lot of blood. And the very least I can do is put a stamp on or show a form of ID so we can vote securely and safely and be confident in the process. That's something I can easily support.
This one's back to Jason. The question is there any chance of Republicans making gains in the New York legislative bodies?
So this goes back to the 2020, 2022 scenario. What's going to happen in New York? I think there's a chance, but by gains, we're probably talking, maybe wins of 2 or 4 seats in a legislative body of 213 members. So it's not like we're talking about a gain that's going to swing the legislature one way or another. But because of what I stated earlier with those 2 seats, small victories can lead to larger victories. And for me, that means even legislatively. So committees are made up, for example, of a percentage of the balance of the legislature. So when I go into a committee meeting and I'm trying to stop, let's say, the issue of assisted suicide, well, then I got to know in my health committee that I've got members I can work with. And if the slant is so far on one party rule, they'll just stack the deck with people that favor that position, and I'm not going to be able to turn it back. But regardless of party, if I can find that there's a percentage and there can be maybe 4 members on this side and 8 in the other party, well, if I can hold 3 of these and 3 of those, or, I can kind of cobble something together, that's something I can work with. So for New York State, victories on that level are going to be small gains in 2020 that then we can build on in 2022 and future years. So that's kind of where I'm at in that one.
Questions coming in. Can you please share the candidates, whether they would be local or regional positions on mandatory vax versus medical freedom?
You want me to go? Okay. I don't know at what level you're talking regarding candidates. That's the difficult part. So I don't know if there's a lot out there in mandatory vaccinations. Certainly at the federal level, there isn't a whole lot out there on that. The conversation is around the state legislature and where we're at. And I can tell you that hasn't even really been a topic of conversation in the legislative body. Sometimes there are topics that are getting a lot of traction on social media. And to be honest, sometimes it's a little misinformation. I'll be sitting in my office, we'll get a phone call, and I heard this bill was moving, and and I look it up, bill doesn't even exist. But somebody said something and it goes in a circle, and now it's assumed this is happening. That's kind of the position with mandatory vaccinations. I don't think that's the position that the governor, even in my state, is looking to take. In fact, interestingly enough, we have a governor who's undercutting any potential vaccination. We don't know what the vaccination is going to be yet. There's even conversations regarding the contents of vaccinations. We don't have a vaccination yet, so we can't know what the contents of that vaccination are. So I think we have to be careful with going too far down the road regarding that. And if you look at public polling, and politicians watch public polling, people are not in favor of a mandatory vaccination. And so I think that, people that are watching the polls are not going to go out there too far into mandatory vaccination, especially when they're scrambling, trying to figure out who can get it first. So if there aren't that many to begin with, I doubt it's going to be mandatory, anytime in the near future.
Somebody had brought up the part of just with elections, and it said, I work in Genesee County's Board of Elections, and we will have iPads to sign in on instead of the books. Are all counties changing to that system? And then they voiced concerns of signatures matching, which you guys have talked about, internet connections and hacking potential, and wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'm only one county over from there, right? My residence. And yeah, I'm seeing this happening all across the state. They've transitioned to a different form of, it's now digital signatures that are going in. And that is the future of where elections are going. Now, they will argue that it's a secure process because there is not an internet access to those machines. What happens is they digitally store the vote counts, right? And there's a paper trail to back things up, but there's a digital It's not connected to a hackable system, so they'll say. In fact, even in my county on election night, sheriffs drive around and pick up all those ballots, and they take them off to boards of elections. That being said, I am concerned about the digital direction everything's going. We know things are at whatever level can be altered. I think there's a reasonable concern that we should watch and be concerned about that. But at the same time, it is just going to be where we're at. We are not going back to pen and paper and pencil. It's going to be digital, and that's something we're going to have to adapt to.
Another question here. If I have an absentee ballot, but will no longer be out of town, can I vote on election day at my polling place?
New York or Pennsylvania? Does it say?
It didn't say.
Does it matter?
We were talking about this earlier,
Yeah.
Jason. We did a story on the news this week. If you do send in an absentee ballot and then go and vote, let's say they start early voting Saturday in New York, they will count your vote, your second vote, and discard the absentee ballot, correct?
Your live in-person vote. Yeah, here's the challenge. And all right, let me get the legalese out of here first. It is technically illegal in New York to vote twice. So please do not vote twice. All right. We can all agree. Let's only vote once. Make sure it's early, but only vote once, right? Get it in there. But the issue with they can request an absentee ballot. There will be millions of absentee ballots that are not returned. And that's why it's kind of interesting to watch all the polling, what's going on. People are saying all these absentee ballots have been requested. I don't care how many are requested. I care how many are returned. And I can tell you that historically, and even this year, there are far more ballots being requested than are being returned. So if you have your ballot, you said I'd rather vote in person, you can certainly still do that. So I have no problem with that whatsoever.
So I wasn't endorsing voting twice there either,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
for the record.
Well, I was hoping, Bob, we're a little concerned about you. We're going to take you back and talk afterwards.
In Pennsylvania, if you have an absentee ballot, if you've requested one or they've sent one to you, but you instead want to vote in person, there are two options. One is if you bring that ballot with you and surrender it, then you may vote in person. If you don't have it with you and you've either left it at home or you voted with that, then you can fill out a provisional ballot, and then they will make an assessment after the fact of which of those to take. I believe it'll be the provisional one once they take custody of the other one that they presume you sent in.
That's a great point to make for New York as well, because we also have a provisional ballot system. And so if you get to your polling place and they say, no, you're not registered to vote here, or your name's been removed from the rolls, or whatever, you can always request what's called a provisional ballot. And what that means is essentially when they're counting the ballots, if they have to go into counting absentees and then eventually provisional ballots, you've still got your vote in there if it goes to the courts and things have to be determined. But if you walk out of there saying, well, I guess I can't vote, well, then you've kind of lost your opportunity. So you should always at least ask for the provisional ballot. It may not ultimately be counted if it doesn't go to a court challenge, but at least you've got it in there that should it, there's an opportunity for provisional ballot counts.
I frequently use the provisional mulligan on the golf course. If I've hit one into the woods and I don't know if I'll be able to find it, then I hit another, and we'll see what happens, whether it counts or not.
Something we all need, I think, on the golf course. This is a good one. In such a hey, let me get this right here. In such a divisive climate, what will it take to bring civility back to politics?
Good question.
It is, yeah. Well, strike it, another mulligan. How about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different reasons why civility has been lost. One of the reasons is because of this, not only because of social media, but because there are ubiquitous cameras everywhere. So let's say Jason and I were on opposite sides of the aisle in Albany, and I'm a liberal Democrat and he's a conservative Republican, but we both have been talking to each other, let's say, considering, here's a good policy that, although neither of our parties really love it, we can work together to make something happen to advance human flourishing. And it just so happens there's a political operative or even just somebody walking down the street that sees Jason and me at a table talking, takes a picture of it, and then says, we're going to use this in the next primary election to primary the liberal Democrat because he's talking with a conservative Republican or vice versa. And so that's number one, is a real challenge related to that. And so some of it is that, and this happened because of, in the Tea Party movement and the radical, rabid side of the Democrat Party. I don't mean to cast aspersions on any of them, except that politics is the art of working together. And civility has fallen apart partly because people don't want to see people work together. It's my way or the highway. And that doesn't mean we compromise on the key values and principles that we fight for. But we have to learn to get along even across the aisle and not hold people to account because I saw you talking to somebody.
Yeah, and you know what? When you talk about the topic of civility and how we get back there, go visit our social media pages. And one of the things that we try to keep up with even our own social media pages. I mean, our organization pages, because I watch when people visit our pages, they want to weigh in on an issue, but they don't always do it in a charitable way. And so I really think it begins with us, and I think that we as Christians have an opportunity to demonstrate to the culture at large what is required to make a difference and to return to civility. If I am, approaching politics and social media and my neighbors as an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, well, we're both going to be blind and toothless, right? It's kind of where it ends up. Not where I want to be. But if we can approach that and we can see that, if we can see the dignity and the value and the fact that we're all made in his image, I think that's a far different approach to how we have to take issues. So before you even post a comment on social media, think about how it's received. Think about, are you advancing an argument, or are you just demagoguing, or are you not really advancing, frankly, the love of Christ to the people you come into contact with? And in a controversial area today, because why not? We're at FLM, so I'll go ahead and, I'm leaving here tonight. All of a sudden, administration just went nuts on what's he going to say, which is the most fun part. Tune in. We're watching this divide, and people are asking me, how do we respond to even some of the racial unrest and all the things that are occurring in America today? Because I hear Christians say things like, we're watching where you go to a restaurant and people are demanding while you're seated at your table, you must say Black Lives Matter, or you must say this. And Christians respond without thinking about that response. And so they'll just throw it back almost like spitting in someone's face saying, well, all lives matter, or this or that. Here's the reality of how I've come to challenge and to think about that issue and been challenged to approach the issue. Oftentimes we say in a situation such as that, well, sure, Black Lives Matter, but, and guess what? You just lost everybody at the word but, right? So don't be a but, all right? But instead, here's how you handle that topic of conversation, all right? I know there's kids watching at home, I apologize. All right, you approach it this way. You say, Black Lives Matter because we are all made in the image of God. Black Lives Matter because we are all his image bearers. So let's talk about the solutions that our society needs. Let's talk about the things that will unite us. And I think when you begin from that perspective, now I've gained an audience and an opportunity to listen. People often wonder when we talk about issues, why do I insist on using terms like people who are attracted to people of the same sex or same-sex attraction rather than some other term that frankly is viewed more derogatory in our culture today? It's because I want to win with these folks. I want to win their hearts. I want to win their minds. Yes, I want it in an argument, but I also know that as soon as I use some other term, they're going to tune me out. So if I want to reach people that really still want to intelligently debate this issue, I have to not hit them with something that is so abrasive that they tune me out, but that they're willing to listen to what I have to say. I have a feminist activist in the Rochester region, and she and I are very different on the issues, but we have found some commonality on things. And so, we didn't break bread together. We had coffee not too long ago. And one of the things we talked about was the things that unify us. Now, probably someone could have snapped that picture and I'm done for, right? Mm-hmm. But we were sitting there in the coffee shop and just talking. And it turns out that she is opposed to pornography because she believes it objectifies women. Well, so do I. Now, she favors abortion. I don't. But she's opposed to pornography. She's opposed to a lot of what's going on today legislatively with transgender issues because she says it's pushing women out of safe spaces. places that were intended for them, locker rooms, restrooms, that kind of thing. And so we found we had more in common because she says, you know what, gender is more than something fluid, right? We both agree on that. And so how we approach the issue, the fact we're willing to sit down and talk and show respect for one another makes a difference. And so, we kind of laugh about it because, I don't like to use the title a lot, but just for sake of being overly dramatic, we sat there and we joked about it. I'm Reverend Jason J. McGuire, and, I'm so far right. I'm opposed to same-sex marriage, and I believe in the sanctity of human life from the moment of conception until natural death. And, and we just went off on that. And she goes, my name is so-and-so, and I'm so far left that I support all these things. But what brings us together today is we both believe that pornography objectifies women. And so we'll stand together co-belligerently against that. We both believe that men and women are created uniquely. Well, I say created, but we're both different. We're unique and yet complementary to one another. And when you can approach it from that perspective, you can begin to win hearts and minds. And do you hear civility happening? That's where we got to be.
Got time for just a couple more questions. This one coming in from a New York listener says, what's going to happen with gun restrictions like pistols and assault rifles?
Yeah, well, no problem. You'll be able to keep water pistols without a problem in New York, all right? Just not battery operated. The question is really what happens with the SAFE Act is often what it comes back to. And the makeup of the legislature is such that you're not going to repeal the SAFE Act in this legislature. There are efforts to do things like to control the amount of ammunition you can purchase in a month. There's efforts to require additional insurances that then make it cost prohibitive for people to go ahead and to own a firearm even for personal self-defense in their home. So it's interesting to me because we see again this divide. Like, you can't put a stamp on an envelope because that's cost prohibitive, but you buy this $1 million insurance policy to be able to protect your family. And depending on your view of those things, we have inconsistent arguments. Here's a nugget for you. The only consistent worldview is a biblical worldview. Every other worldview breaks down. So begin from that perspective. Let's chase the biblical worldview to have a consistent worldview. Regarding the Second Amendment and what will happen in New York, we know it's not the most friendly state for it, but I do not see a lot changing in the near future. But it could get worse depending on which way the legislature goes after November.
This one, looking forward to the future a little bit. Any thoughts on presidential candidates come 2024 and any possibilities from New York or PA that would make for good presidential candidates?
Well, I think it'll be a crowded field. Probably.
I say Michael Gear from Pennsylvania, by the way. Right. So can we get some agreement there? Is it too early to declare, Michael? Is now a good time?
I'd like to wait till after the votes are counted.
I
in this
appreciate
election.
that. All right.
Yeah. I don't want to tip my hand. Pennsylvania's had only one president, James Buchanan, who was not an all-star, let's say. So we're not the state of presidents. I don't know that I see anyone on our stage that would be there. I think it'll be a crowded field, depending on what happens in 2020. But I don't see anyone from Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to buy a trademark tonight. Get it in gear 2024. All right. And we're ready to go.
Campaign manager here.
I don't know that I see New York candidates that will emerge necessarily. Yeah, I think that probably one of the faces that I am watching, though, is Nikki Haley. I think Nikki Haley can probably emerge as one of the faces of the party moving forward. I think she brings some interesting things to the table. She is female. She certainly has a strong immigration story. She's conservative, so I think that will help in GOP primaries. And yet she also has left the Trump administration early enough that she probably wouldn't be identified with it, would have a little more independence than some others might in 2024. And I think whatever happens this election, after 4 more years, there will be a turning of the party one way or the other. So I think that probably she's a person to watch to see where she comes down on that. And yet she was a part of the administration, so it also allows her the opportunity to not run so far from the Trump administration that she's kind of uniquely positioned to get the mantle of the party. As far as the Democratic side, yeah, we've got a person that I think in New York is interested in running for president, and I think that's Governor Andrew Cuomo. Governor Andrew Cuomo was anticipated to run again in 2022 for governor. And I think that he runs in 2022. Remember, he wants to win more terms than his father did, so he'd win a fourth term, and it is easier, or would desire to win a fourth term, and it will be easier to run for president from an executive office, a governor of a state, than somebody who was a former governor. So I think that probably, for me, I'll be watching Nikki Haley and Governor Andrew Cuomo as we move towards 2024.
All right, we wrap up with a little bit of a loaded question here for both you guys. Ranch or blue cheese, and are you a drum or flat guy when eating chicken wings?
Oh my gosh.
This is important stuff.
Michael, do I need to bail you out on this one?
Take your
All right.
time.
Let me tell you how it's done. All right. This is all right. All right. So we're going to say blue cheese. All right. And nobody eats the flats. Come on. You know, it's all about the drum. All right. So we want them extra crispy. We want them buffalo style. And I don't mind if you barbecue them, but they must also go on the grill. All right.
So are you saying wings for the debate watching tonight?
We're on. All right. And I'm telling you what, if you run in 2024, I'll buy you a bucket of wings. All right. Yeah.
My first bribe.
Well, you mentioned the debate, guys, and we want to let you guys out of here so some of you can catch that debate at 9 o'clock, the last debate before the election. You know, I was thinking, Brandon, you did a story a few days ago about in the New Mexico desert, there's a rock where you can live under for 5 days if you want to get away from politics. November 2nd through the 7th. 50 feet. I thought this was a joke till I looked it up. It's a true story. 50 feet underground. They want people to reserve rooms, hotels.com. I think they're already booked. But you can live under a rock for the entire length of this election. I'm glad you guys aren't living under a rock because this is important. It's messy stuff, but it's important stuff. And we can't live under a rock. As Christians, we have to shine our light. And it is such a privilege to have these two gentlemen here tonight. Again, we want to leave you with a love offering. Please go text SHARE to 91999 and just to show our love for you and the work you've done for 8 years here at Family Life. And I love this event. Those watching online, thank you. But I'd just like to wrap with prayer. And Jason, you've done a lot of talking. I think we'll let Michael leave us tonight with a closing prayer for this upcoming election and for this nation. If you would bathe us in prayer, please. Thank you.
Certainly will. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for the freedoms that we have in this nation, and even to be here this evening and to contemplate and talk about weighty issues, issues that are not only on our minds but on your heart. We do pray for the state of New York and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, indeed the United States of America. As we face this election coming forward, people already having voted, people still to vote, Father, that you would not give us the leadership that we deserve, but have mercy on us. And despite our failings as people and as citizens and as a nation with the evil that is permitted here, that you would give us righteous leadership at all walks of government. Pray, Lord, that you would lead your people, those who call you by their name, to be praying, to be engaging, and to be voting in this election, to use their voice as if it, to analogize it to the parable of the talent. This valuable item to use that was won at a high cost, to use for your purposes and not to bury it or to hide under a rock. We thank you, Lord, for Family Life Network and for this ministry, for Bob and for Brandon and for all those that work here to serve Pennsylvania and New York and the body of Christ and beyond with the gospel and with the message of hope. And Father, we pray, Lord, that you would continue to be the hope for all of us, that even as we suffer challenging times, whether personally because of economic downturns or disease or other maladies, or whether it's because we lament what we see in our nation, Father, that our eyes would turn to you where our hope comes from. We thank you, Lord, for the answers to prayer that Jason even described here this evening, knowing that you're in control and that we can trust in you. So we pray all these things with thankfulness for those that made deposits of freedom that we are now living under in this nation. And we pray, Lord, that will continue for our children and grandchildren and beyond, should the Lord tarry. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Can we get a final round of applause for Michael and Jason, please? Thank you, guys. Thank you for coming out. Good night.
Good night.